When I was invited to participate in ARPA's activities as a scientific consultant, the noble cause that ARPA has and the thought of having a genetics center in Armenia, which I've been collaborating for several years now, it was just mind-boggling. And by just simple the power of social media and using internet, ARPA was able to collect the money and raise the money to buy the sequencer, which I will talk about, and I'll show you what it is and what we can use it for and why it's important to have it in Armenia. So I have a presentation index. My presentation may be a little long. I'll try to summarize it, but then if you have any questions, please feel free to ask or keep it to the end of the presentation and we can answer all of them. I'm going to review, just a quick review of genetics. So those of you who are not familiar with it can get a grasp of what genetics is and what we do. And then we'll talk about some statistical diseases in Armenian population. Then I'll talk about a little bit more my research on FMF, aka the Armenian disease, and some other disorders which is prevalent, quite prevalent in Armenians. Significance of this genetic center, and then what ARPA has done, and then we'll conclude. So let's look at this DNA. Well, most of you are familiar with the DNA, the double helix, the Watson-Crick double helix, which is a little nucleic acid molecule in our body. And there are genes in DNA. So you can see the DNA double helix here and here, and then this portion of it is called a gene. A gene has areas that can code for protein, those colored areas, and the blue areas that do not code for protein. Therefore, through processes, they're spliced out and they become protein. And what are the proteins? Proteins are everything in our body: skin, bone, teeth, eye, hormones, and everything else pretty much is protein in our body. So genes code for the proteins, and the proteins do the biological analysis of the carbohydrates and sugar and fat and all that. DNA's double helix has two binding. A binds to T and C binds to G. This alphabet has only 4 letters, and that 4 letters creates us and the rest of the creatures in the world. So it's pretty impressive. How does it work? The double helix here, every 3 of them, which is called a codon, 3 nucleic acids, code for 1 amino acid. An amino acid is what builds the protein. So every 3 code here is codon, every codon 1, 2, 3, code for each one of the amino acids. So that amino acids come together and create the protein. This is how it works. We go from DNA to RNA. RNA is the messenger which codes the protein. DNA transcribes to RNA, RNA translates to protein. And I will show you how. This is a transcription complex. It's very, very complex as you can see it. That's what they call it, transcription complex. RNA polymerase binds to DNA, and lots of these proteins help, and they create the messenger RNA. And the messenger RNA, which is here you can see in blue, and is moving through a product called ribosome, and every 3 codon in the ribosome adds 1 amino acid to this protein which is built. And these little circles that you can see, each one is a protein built. And the messenger RNA is read and then disintegrates in the body and becomes the protein. These are different protein shapes. You can see complex proteins have multiple proteins coming together, like hemoglobin, like here. And there are different forms of protein, helix protein, and each, like this could be an insulin protein. And all these are built through crystallography of scientists have made it, and this comes all from our genes. So basically, DNA causes a protein. So any changes in the DNA is what is responsible for the diversity that we see here today. Every one of us is so different from the person sitting next to us, correct? And those are the changes that are in our DNA, and the combination of those changes creates a different person, or different animal, or any single cell organism. DNA replicates, so our skin cells die, most of our cells die in the body, and DNA cells have to replicate to replace it. Otherwise, we will be finished in probably 3 months. So when they replicate, mistakes happen in the DNA gene. Human DNA has 46 chromosomes, And and 3 billion base pair. All those ATGCs that you saw, there's 3 billion of them in every single cell in the body. So it's just mind-boggling how complex it is. So they replicate. During replication, they introduce mistakes. There is only one type of cell in the body that does not replicate. So when we are born, we have the same number of cells, or maybe less, because they could die, and until we die. Does anyone know what cells those could be? Brain or nerve cells. Nerve cells are the one, that's why any nerve damage is permanent, so we cannot repair it, right? Unless now they are trying to use stem cells to create new nerve and so on. So this is how it works. You can see the replication happens and there's a mistake. A and T have to bind to each other. Here A binds to a C. And if this mistake is not corrected, it goes to the next generation of replication, and you can have a wild type, which was the same as the original DNA, which is called, and the mutant, which is a new C2G instead of this A2C. And once these changes happen, they could change the amino acid structure, and a new protein can be created, which may be beneficial to us. And that's through evolution, that's what has happened, and we have become us, and the animals have stayed there. Different type of mutations, I'm not going to go through detail, but there's quite a few different types that change the amino acid and so on and so forth. So actually it's a gift, so we can share this with each other. If you really, like baldness is hereditary, and so on and so forth. Also, the high color, strong muscles, intelligence to some extent is hereditary, it's genetic, but education is not. So it's 50-50 pretty much, environmental factors versus genetic factors. So good genes can go bad if the environment is bad. Bad genes can become good if the environment is good and they're using the best of the environment. Okay, let's talk about some statistics in Armenia. I got these statistics from internet, obviously. Life expectancy, world life expectancy is the major source that does, and these are non-profit organizations that they collect mortality data per disease per nation. So here you can see some numbers, and I put the 3 countries, regional countries in South Caucasus, and I'll tell you why, because we need to compare. In science, we cannot just study one thing. We have to have controls, and we have to have comparisons. So I got Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, obviously. Armenians and Georgians, remember, are more genetically close to each other. They're more indigenous population. Azeris came from their Central Asian Turks, and they came from those areas about 800 years ago. And they populated the Caspian Sea area. So Azeris will be genetically different from us. Armenian Georgians will be the same, and we can look at the diseases now. Congenital and endocrine diseases. Endocrine are most of the hormones secreting tissue in our body. Congenital anomalies, we can see that Armenia is number 20 in the world on the mortality. So remember, the lower the number is bad. High numbers are better here. Because the lower the number, that means we have the highest incident in the world because of these numbers. So 20 for congenital anomalies. Diabetes, number 11. Look at the comparison with Azerbaijan and Georgia. They are doing much, much better than us. So the only difference here is that we could have some other lifestyles could be different. Still, there should be something more than lifestyle here, which is mostly genetic factors, which are unknown right now because we don't have any genetic centers in Armenia who can actually study these kind of diseases for us. Endocrine, not so much, pretty much level. Liver diseases, pretty much the same, except that Azeris have less, and we can attribute that to the Azeris being Muslim and drinking less maybe, and Armenian and Georgians drinking more. Kidney diseases, pretty much the same, except for some reason in Georgians. And obviously these are reported information, so may not be that accurate. The heart and coronary diseases in Armenia, you can see coronary heart diseases pretty much common in the region. And that could be a lifestyle issue. Hypertension, heart inflammation, rheumatic heart fever are pretty high. Stroke is pretty high in Azeris for some reason. Georgians have high too. Armenians are a little less prone to stroke. in this data. This should be a process because I have done my due diligence and this data look pretty nice. What is really worrying is the cancer. And you can see especially the breast cancer, which is number 4. It used to be number 1. Now it's number 4 in the world on mortality rates of breast cancer in Armenia. And the group that I work in Armenia, they have data, they have genetic samples from 10 families, which 3 generations, grandmother, mother, and daughter, have gotten breast cancer before age of 30, and they have died before age of 30. So those samples are there. I mean, those great samples, and we're trying to raise some money to start testing those for genetic testing to see what mutations in the Armenian genes could have caused, and they are probably some which are unique to us. So instead of us going through all these mutations, which I'll show you what they are, we will focus on the ones which are specific and unique to our population. And that could apply to diaspora too. Cervical cancer, ovarian cancer, pretty much high in the women cancer area, except that Georgians are in the uterine cancer are pretty much close, with the breast cancer being second. So those relate. Remember, I told you Georgians, Armenians are closer genetically than Azeris are. So Azeris are different. That makes sense. Digestive system, colorectal cancer, again higher than the other ones. Esophagus, not bad relative to Azeris. Oral cancers are the same. Stomach cancers, again, in the region is more prevalent. Esophagus cancer, one cause of it is drinking very hot tea. And in some areas of northern Iran, and now we can see in Azerbaijan, when they drink too much of hot tea, very boiling hot tea, the prevalence of esophageal cancer is much higher in this kind of population than others. And in Armenia, we know that they don't drink too much tea. So, the tissue organ cancers, kidney, again, high, you can see they're high, and the lung and bladder cancer, unbelievably higher rates than the rest of the groups in the area. Skin and gland cancer, pancreas, one of the deadliest cancers, number 64. It's pretty high. Skin, thank God, 185 because probably nobody goes under sun there. And prostate cancer, again, it's doing better than the other cancers. Other common disorders for Alzheimer's, 90, but relative to the other countries, much higher than Azerbaijan and Georgia, although it's just in the middle of the countries of the world. Asthma, again, high. Parkinson, very, very high. So Parkinson has genetic implications. There is no question about it, just we haven't been able to find what genes are there, because all of a sudden the cells in the brain stop producing dopamine. And there should be a factor, a program factor, why these cells stop. And you can see here, relative to the rest of the region, the 5, Armenia and the rest are pretty high. MS and other neoplasms are there too. Birth and nutrition rate. I put some non-disease characters here because we want to compare the data. First of all, see how the data looks like, and then see if we can argue that those which are diseases could be genetic or not. So you can see on birth and nutrition, low birth weight, pretty much the countries in the region do the same. Malnutrition, again, this is higher the better because there is less malnutrition here. In Armenians, birth trauma, again, same thing, and anemia, for some reason, is higher in Azeris than the rest of the region in anemia. Infectious diseases, this is another controlled region. These are not genetic disorders. These are all acquired from viruses, bacteria, and parasites. And you can see it's pretty much across the region is the same. There may be a few other differences. Hepatitis C is Hepatitis C and AIDS are more STDs, sexually transmitted ones, and flu, pneumonia, TB, malaria, and so on and so forth. So very similar numbers. So that means, first of all, these numbers could be close to the reality. And second is that these are all acquired infections. So if they are similar, that means there is no genetic difference in the acquired infection. And if the other ones are different, that means it could be a genetic factor. And I'm pretty confident there will be some. Lifestyle rates, and these are deaths from alcohol. This probably is not correct. I'm just wondering why Georgians don't drink. Anybody familiar with Georgians? I think they came to drug use. Lots of drug use here. Maybe they should normalize these two together. Falls, death from falls, accidents, poisoning, other injuries, traffic accidents, suicides, and violence. So again, you can see there's not too much of it, except for one or two, pretty much the same level. The same lifestyle, the same environment, but in some cases, which we see now, and life expectancy, pretty much close, 71.3, 71.4, 72.1. In females, obviously, is higher than males, and in Armenians, about 10 years difference. Those are pretty close too. Some other diseases. I believe I went through these, except that these two were added: Alzheimer's dementia with 90 and MS with 67. So these are the significant rates. This is the slide that is very important to us. So these show that there is a strong genetic factor on the diseases that we have here, especially on the cancer side. You can see 5 of 6, which are significantly different from the regional population, which live in the same environment and have the same lifestyle, are cancers. And we all know that cancer could very well have genetic sources. And we got a cancer expert here sitting from one of my old colleagues here, Moradian sitting here, a cancer expert, so she can answer the questions that I will not be able to. So there is probably Parkinson, very genetic significant. So how do we find out about this? These are a few other data that I put here. Population of above 65, you can say I compared it to Azerbaijan. Above 65 is much less in Armenia. So as we know, not very many people are happy to live longer than 65 in Armenia, which is a sad story, but other countries do better. Infant mortality is much higher, much better in Armenia than in Azerbaijan. Well, infants are very well taken care of in Armenia, maybe, and birth rates are less than Azerbaijan, so Azerbaijan have more people, so they may have more deaths in them. Literacy, again, is much higher. Armenia is the number 21 country as literacy, Azerbaijan is 45, and that becomes, we have much more rural areas than Armenia does. I'm going to talk about a little bit about my research on FMF, and FMF is an autoinflammatory disorder. It's called Armenian disease because every 1 out of 3 Armenians is a carrier of FMF. And every 5 in 100, 5% are affected by it, which is very, very high percentage. So that's why when I was graduating, I decided to start working on this, and we have gone a long way through, and we have become kind of an authority in the field with my colleagues in Armenia. You can see the symptoms, family history, fever. I'm not going to go over this a lot because if you need anything on FMF, you can call me or email me. I have my information on the last slide, and we can discuss it later. But you probably are mostly familiar with this. It affects several parts of the body. It's an inflammatory disorder. So anywhere there is an inflammation and FMF is present, that means the body does not have the tools to fight that inflammation. That's why the pain comes upon. But then there is a side effect, which is the amyloidosis. Because every time inflammation happens, amyloid tissue gets produced in the body, and it precipitates in places like kidneys, because that's where the blood flows all the time. And amyloid tissue you can see on the white areas, it can block the tubules and it can cause kidney failures. So that's the more important than the pain to us, because we want to stop that amyloidosis and the kidney failure. Several, I had a patient, young 38-year-old or 42-year-old Armenian lady with 2 kids, had FMF, was misdiagnosed in the United States, had appendectomy. They took out the ovary on the right side. Then kidneys failed. Then Cedars-Sinai, they wanted to do a heart transplant because they had congestive heart failure after that. Finally, she was diagnosed with FMF. She started taking the colchicine, the medication. Heart went from 15% to 45% in 3 months. So it's preventable. It's not high-considered condition. So we should be all aware and educating the body to solve it. This is the gene, has 10 areas, 10 exons. 2 areas of it are very Mutations happen in these two areas mostly, but other places are there too. We sequence the gene, several places screen it, but when we say sequencing, and that's exactly what Dr. Rocco and ARPA Institute was interested in, to create these data. These are individual DNA bases that we look in every gene. So we test them, there's a series of chemical reactions goes through, and we get this data. And on this data, we can see individual bases change, and based on the change in individual bases, we can decide which one of these mutations is in the gene. So when we decide which one is there, and you can see there's like over 42 mutations in FMF, then now we have an algorithm to match with the severity of the disease with the mutation that is causing it, and adjust the dosage for the patient. How is it inherited? Well, this is an autosomal inheritance. Let's say here, non-affected woman and a carrier man marry, and two of the children, 50% chance that they can become carriers. Now, in some carriers, this is a better slide. If they both are carriers, both parents are carriers, then 25% chance that their child will have FMF because they can get the two little defective alleles. And 50% that they will be carriers, and 25% that the child will be normal. And that's the major concern about families, that they say 3 generations we didn't have any FMF in it, and all of a sudden one of the children has it. So it can be silent in generations. It's very personalized, and then it can show itself in the next population, the next generation. And in 20% of our patients, which we did this publication on in Nature Journal of Genetics, 20% of the populations are heterozygous. That means they have only one mutation, but they have the symptoms. And the cause of it is that they have so much inflammation in their body that one healthy gene is not producing enough pyrin, which is the protein, to fight inflammation. So it's called haploinsufficiency in genetic terminology. This was a very interesting article. It got a lot of attention in the world, and many people were not treating heterozygotes. They're saying, no, your arthritis is some other reason, and it's not because of FMF. But then we told them that you should start a colchicine therapy on that, at least a trial, to see if it's working or not. And this is how the inflammation works. Cuts, injury, severe exercise, all that inflammation creates the inflammatory cytokines. They go to brain orders the inflammation through interleukin beta and alpha. And interleukin-1 beta is the one that causes the neutrophils to come and do the inflammation. Now what the pyrin does, which is the FMF gene, here, blocks it. It has a negative feedback on it. So blocks the interleukin, and consequently the amyloid, serum amyloid, which is causing those kidney failures, stops. If our body does not have that gene, and that's the FMF patient, then it becomes more painful, and it could become amyloidosis. Now I want to show you some information. Italian, French, Greeks, and Spaniard. You can see how different the mutation frequency is in these 4 populations. So the genetics can be very different. In Arabs, Lebanese, Israeli Arabs, Maghrebians, and others, you can see again, even in Arabs, there are several different mutation frequencies that you can see. In Jews, North African, Iraqi, others are quite different than Ashkenazi Jews, but Ashkenazis have FMF too. Armenians and Turks, surprisingly, those two are similar, okay? Now the reason I will tell you, and I asked the same question because I was in an NIH conference and the Turk scientist was presenting this data, which came from a lab in France. So they were happy that they didn't do this study, French did, and French saying that Armenian and Turkish genes and mutations are very similar to each other. And I got up and I asked, okay, and so from where in Turkey is your data collected? Is it from eastern side or is it from western side? Or central? Where is it coming from? And he didn't answer. He said it's from all over. I said, are you sure it's from all over? And he said no, but he didn't like it because I said, well, this is coming from Kurdish area, and quarter of the Turkish population is Kurdish, with millions of them. And Kurds and Armenians are pretty much the same genetic makeup of the Mediterranean people. So when I started explaining that, he didn't like it, let's put it that way. So he was very upset, but I could care less. Then, but that's why they're similar, because most of their patients come from Southeast Turkey, from Sivas, Van area, and we know who live there and who are these people. They could be, most of them could be in Armenia. Arabs and Jews, but they're different. Arabs and Jews have different, although they're both Semites, they're very different in genetic makeup. In Armenians even, there is difference. This study came from, again, a group of Kamara Sarkisian group with some French scientists. And in Yerevan, you can see different, these are the three dominant mutations. And you can see in Yerevan, Sevan, similar, pretty similar. But then you can see in ARPA, in Artsakh, one mutation is a lot more dominant than other regions, and the other one, which is supposed to be higher in, even in France, it's more than in Artsakh. And that could be because Artsakh people have been kind of isolated, living their own little life in the area till today, probably, and they may have had some sort of a genetic drift in that sense, and they move towards this mutation rather than the B7268. So even amongst Armenians, the genes could be different, but depending on the area and region. FMF affects a lot of other disorders, epilepsy, bronchial asthma, multiple sclerosis, anything that has to do with inflammation could be related to FMF if they have the mutation. That's what we did this. Okay, let me do this one too. These are my patients. Father, son, daughter have the same mutations. Father and daughter have no symptoms. Son started the symptoms from age 4, reacting to a vaccination. So it's very personalized. Doesn't matter we have the mutation, we should have the symptoms or not. It's all, we haven't figured out how that works, but it's very personalized. Every person's body reacts to it differently with the healthy mother. So those symptoms prompted us to do this study, which we started a year and a half ago, and luckily, and we're very happy that it was published in Genetics in Medicine, which is a very important policy of the journal. People who publish in Genetics in Medicine are people who decide how to treat genetic diseases. And that's what we told the scientists, we told the physicians here, that you have to, if you see these series of diseases, we have seen them in the Armenian population, therefore you should start checking them for FMF if they belong to this target population, and coaches in therapy can help alleviate their pain. It hasn't come out yet, this just was sent to me a few days ago, it will come out soon. Other disorders that could be genetic, coagulation pathway, we all know that when we have a cut, our blood starts clotting. So sometimes, and you can see there's lots of steps here, and these steps could cause mutations and problems. And when there is a problem, you can see there is diseases called coagulopathies, thrombocytosis, big vein thrombosis, and that's where the thrombosis can happen in the veins and arteries. Factor V, right mutation is one of them. It's very important for people who have sudden, unreasonable heart attacks or strokes. And that's how it happens, that the blood clot is created, although they're healthy, they have low cholesterol, everything is good with them, healthy people, but they have genetically a gene that does not work properly, and it creates the clot. And the clot goes into the artery and blocks the artery, and they have a sudden heart attack at a young age because it's genetic. Factor 2 is another factor, which is called the prothrombin at the last of the pathway that could cause the brain aneurysms. And again, you can see the clot is filled here and then ruptures, and blood starts getting into. In fact, I had a 46-year-old friend in Iran who died last year because of a brain aneurysm, and it helped him. MTHFR is another mutation gene which causes homocystinemia, and that's again heart disease. High cholesterol levels are due to a protein called ApoE, apolipoprotein, and that's where obviously you're very familiar with this. Cholesterol plaques start building up in arteries, get higher and higher, and then they clog the artery and they create the heart attacks. It also causes the Alzheimer's disease. And how does that do? In the brain neurons, you can see, actually I have a better picture. here that the neurons have pathway at the end, and these plaques, which are called beta-amyloid plaques from ApoE genes, get together and create in the cells, and they come and block the brain pathways in the neurons, which is right here. There you go. This looks like the LA traffic, right? Everything open and moving along, and when the plaques are generated, it will look more like a Midwest traffic, and it will. The messages will not go through. When they don't go through, then the brain nerves cannot remember it, so we start forgetting. It becomes Alzheimer's and dementia. So, and that could be genetic because of ApoE gene. And you can see here's the gene. E4, E2 and E4 are the bad ones. E2 causes the hypercholesterolemia. E4 causes the Alzheimer's disease. So you can see E4, high Alzheimer's disease, and E2 is hypercholesterolemia. Warfarin is another drug that is used for blood thinners, thinning the blood, and it's prophylactic for thromboembolism. Now, warfarin is depending on the metabolism of two genes. When they put the drug in our body genes change the drug to an active form and it works. So warfarin, CYP2C19 and VCOR1 are the two enzymes that metabolize warfarin. And now we know that these could have mutations in them, and we could have different genotypes. STAR1s are the normal one, but when we go to STAR2 and STAR3, then the metabolism levels become lower. So maybe patient needs more warfarin because it cannot metabolize enough of it, or maybe it needs less because more warfarin can become toxic for it. Depending on the drug, I'm not sure exactly what warfarin works, but the other ones are different. This shows the ones who were tested for those genes, and rate of hospitalization. This is a Mayo Clinic study, was much less than the ones which were not tested for warfarin pharmacogenetics. What's the benefit to the patient? Look at the cost. Sometimes warfarin is hard to stabilize in the body, which is $9 a month, so they start prescribing Plavix or Xarelto, which is more than $250 a month. And imagine, in Armenia, $9 versus $200 is a big, big difference for someone who's taking this medicine. So one test can actually save their life much easier and save their money in their pockets too. Even here, $200 versus $10 a month is a big difference in cost of the medication. So that's called the pharmacogenomics. Colorectal cancer, obviously we know it can be genetic. You can see here that colorectal cancer, sporadic causes, and then familiar causes. A big chunk of it, up to 30-35% of it, right now we know it's genetic, it has genetic causes. So by having family members who have colorectal cancer, we can do the genes and we can decide to have a prophylactic treatment or some more colonoscopy, more often colonoscopy, or at younger ages. So these are all issues that we can face with colorectal cancer. These are the pathways, and all these genes can mutate and cause cancer. So it's very complex. Well, we have to start somewhere. Breast cancer, BRCA1 and 2, which are very famous, as you know. Angelina Jolie had it, and she had a double mastectomy because of that mutation. Those are the known causes. These are tumor suppressor genes, and when they don't work properly, the tumors in the breast can become cancerous. Our body generates a lot of tumors, but we have defense mechanisms that kills them. But the ones that are not killed could become cancerous. DNA is damaged. When the DNA is damaged, cancer could be caused. Those genes, BRCA1 and 2, kill the damaged DNA. When they cannot do it, it will become cancer. There are other genes too. ATM, and this is not really filling anybody's pocket, actually taking it out. It's called ATM gene. P53, again, tumor growth suppressor, CHEK2, P10, CDH1. So there's plenty of genes that we can test for this. And now we have gene panels in the United States and in Europe that are tested for patients to know if they, obviously family history is very important, and then some people just have the money and want to get tested or get tested to know if they have predisposition to cancer or not. These are the pathways again, very complex. I just wanted to show you how much work have scientists done to get through these pathways and finding. Breast cancer is not like FMF. If you have one mutation, it could cause a cancer. You don't need two of them, or you don't, only 20% can get it. It's called a dominant trait. So the BRCA1 and 2 mutation, one mutation is affected, and they can pass it on to their children, and they can get younger age breast cancer, or ovarian in the women. Okay, now we talked about all these diseases, and now let's talk about why is it important to have a genetic center in Armenia. The first concept is called a personalized medicine. Basically, every one of us, as I said, in the case of FMF, every one of us has a genetic makeup which is very unique to us. Therefore, the facts that can happen to us may not be the same with our even siblings, brothers, sisters, or mother and father. So having the genetic testing done on the individual is very important. So one may say, well, I have no family history of FMF, but we can see that their generation could have it. So these tests are very important to be done, which is called, and then pharmacogenetics, basically based on the warfarin therapy or several other ones, we decide that, okay, I have this mutation, so I need to increase my dose of the drug or decrease it because it could cause toxicity. And the side effect of the drugs, the lesser, the better of the treatment and the quality of life. These are very interesting ones that they put the DNA in the medicine bottle, or through DNA, people can get actually, the doctor becomes very dependent on genetic testing and DNA testing. So, and the drugs, the patient group, drug toxic but beneficial. Drug not toxic and not beneficial. So it can be several different groups based on the genetic testing that the drug can be decided which one to use or not use, is it toxic or not toxic. So several other advantages that it came to my mind that I put it here. First of all, it advances the science and medicine in the country, which is in desperate need of assistance to advance. Much needed genetic disorder diagnosis. We had a family in Armenia, about 11 of them, which they sent the samples to me, and I sequenced, first they sent it to Europe, they collaborated with the European country, they did a next generation sequencing analysis, and they find a region which looked that there could be some insertions in that region, in that gene. So they sent the samples to me, and I sequenced them to standard sequencing, which is more accurate, and we saw that, yes, there is. So 8 out of 11, which I didn't know which ones were, but I was able to identify correctly those 3 which were healthy. The other 8 had mental retardation in the family. They come from a village next to Korea. So, and these mutations have never been recorded in the literature anywhere. This is all novel, it's all new. So we're working on that now to try to publish that mutation there. So if we had known that there is a unique marker, genetic marker to the Armenian population, then diaspora Armenians will be more focused, and they have to spend less money. It's difficult to do this in diaspora because we're all over the place. We go to different doctors, but in Armenia it's a much more concentrated population, so it's much easier to identify the genetic markers that are unique to us. And we share our information. Pretty much all of our Armenians have the same DNA, and that became apparent with the FMF because we have done studies about Armenians which came from different diaspora communities, and the frequency of the mutations were pretty much the same in every population. So it doesn't matter you come from Armenia or you come from anywhere else, the FMF frequency of mutation is the same. And I suspect all of these other mutations which they didn't happen 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they happened all at least hundreds of years ago, have spread in the population enough that diaspora Armenians and the Armenian Armenians could share that genetic information with each other, and it's much easier to find the markers in Armenia and use it in diaspora than like we did for FMF. Okay, this is a team that I work with, Professor Thomas Sarkisian. She has her own lab, These are all her scientists, and the group that I work with, David and Husky is right there. Very, very bright scientists. They could find, they could find the genetic markers. It's just we need to assist them in finding. And when I heard that ARPA is doing such a novel work, I just had no choice but just to join and help ARPA to get this center up and running in Armenia. Obviously, it won't be with this team. This is the team that I'm working primarily, but it will be with this team. Dr. Panosyan, Harold here, and their board of directors meeting with several people and name of the ARPA analysis research and planning in Armenia. It's a very interesting name. I congratulate the person who came up with that name. Very, very attractive. And the acronym is ARPA, which is the other name of the Sevan, right? The river. And they came together, and the DNA project was initiated. As Dr. Panosyan said, we were able to collect the money. The money there, and soon we'll purchase a 4-capillary DNA sequencer with pump, which is a newer model, and we send it to Armenia to be placed in the Genetic Institute. It was a brilliant idea. There are several challenges. We still need to make sure that this instrument works. Therefore, we have to have maintenance service contract with outside vendors. Those are expensive, could be thousands of dollars a year to make sure it works. The consumables are expensive, so that could be provided for their research and their testing there. And we need everybody's involvement. If you know people who can help in any way, that would be great. Tomorrow could be too late because science is moving so fast that we may be actually falling so behind that we never catch up. So let's get involved and let's make a difference and nothing else. And not think about anything else. And the people, there are several people who want to help and work in Armenia. Many of them think about business. If they're thinking about business, they should go build buildings. They should go do construction, they should go do import-export. In science, if they're thinking business, they shouldn't do science. But unfortunately, some I've seen in LA, even some lab owners were thinking benefit, profit. They tried to help, but then when they saw that it's just helping as a grant, as a government grant, they all backed up. So we don't need those kind of benefactors. We need people who really want to get involved and help. This is the group in National Academy of Sciences. Dr. Panosyan knows them much better than I do. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to meet them. Hopefully soon, when I go next time, I will meet them. And I've heard they're, again, very brilliant scientists, and they're willing to help. This is their labs. I have some pictures from their labs, and the students in the Molecular Biology Institute that are graduating. So it's a very well-worked cause. So let's get involved, help. We all have the same traits, and we will probably have the same genes too. It's a novel project. Talent is an accident of genes, and the responsibility that comes with talent, so let's use that talent to help this project and move it forward. I'm going to end it with my favorite quote that says, "Upon the flames of hesitation, to reach the bones of countless millions who on the threshold of victory sat down to wait and waiting to die." So it's not time to wait, it's time to act, and I'm hoping that whoever's here, you will get all your friends, family, relatives, everybody else involved to help ARPA and their noble cause, and all of us can make a difference. And hopefully soon, with the publications that will be emailed to you from those institutes in Armenia and collaborating with us, and our Professor Sarkis Matmanian from Caltech is also collaborating with us. He's not here today, but he was here yesterday. And hopefully we'll be able to move science one step further and find those genetic markers which are unique to us and figure out what the hell this Armenian gene is. Thank you.